todos los miembros del área de nuevas tecnologías, agradecemos que ustedes estén aquí acompañándonos en este evento, que es un evento que hemos procurado hacer ya desde hace varios años, año con año. La idea original de este evento fue dar a conocer esta temática que en ese momento, 2016, era muy nueva, casi no se había escuchado, que es el tema del Internet de las Cosas, y pues lo hemos mantenido, forma parte de uno de los temas que se investigan dentro del área. Y en esta ocasión vamos a tener esta conferencia. Tenemos un evento preparado que, como otros años, consta de varias actividades, exposiciones, conferencias. Como todos ustedes saben, este año tenemos la problemática del paro estudiantil y por eso se decidió posponer algunas de las otras actividades. Después les informaremos sobre ellas, pero el día de hoy tenemos esta importante conferencia. Agradecemos mucho a Rob su presencia aquí, el que nos esté apoyando con esta temática. Y pues ahorita el doctor Edwin Almeida lo presentará. Es una persona que está muy involucrada con este tema y que ya hemos tenido la oportunidad de contar en otra ocasión con su presencia. Es la conferencia que hoy nos va a impartir y agradecemos su presencia. Edwin, te dejo para que tú lo presentes.
Gracias. Buenos días. Good afternoon to Rob. Welcome. I'm going to introduce you on Spanish and then we'll talk in English. Okay. Buenos días, Rob. Le voy a dar una introducción de la importancia de Rob. Ahorita es Chief Innovation Officer at Aspen IoT. Rob es el fundador del Consejo del Internet de las Cosas de la Comunidad Económica Europea. Trabajado como responsable en diferentes proyectos de la Unión Europea como Target Smart, Next Generation Internet, el autor de The Internet of Things, A Critic of Ambient Technology, and All-Seeing Network of RFID. Él ha estado con nosotros aquí en México en el 2017, nos dio un curso muy interesante sobre Internet de las Cosas. En México pues está muy en boga el Internet de las Cosas y siempre ha estado con nosotros asesorándonos y platicándonos sobre sus puntos de vista. Ha trabajado por todo el mundo, Rob, y ha sido asesor en diferentes proyectos en Europa, en Asia y pues de repente aquí en México. Bueno, démosle la bienvenida a Rob y yo les pediría por favor que en la medida de lo posible enciendan sus cámaras para que Rob nos pueda ver y podamos interactuar con él. So, welcome Rob. So I was introducing you and we're hoping to listen to you about the IoT and your new ideas about IoT for good. And we want to thank you very much because you give us some time to chat with us, to explain your ideas, and to introduce us to a very important item like IoT. So welcome, and we'll listen to you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Edwin. And thank you for having me. We are old friends, so we go way back. And I was also very happy to be at the university a few years ago. And I have I think a bit of a short story, and then we can talk and have a discussion and have some questions. So I think I have a very different background than most people in Internet of Things. Most are engineers or computer scientists or people that love tinkering with machines and with boards. And but my background basically is in literature. and languages. And so I came to this field in a very different way. I first heard about this Internet of Things term in 2000, when I went to a conference in Sweden, which was called Building Tomorrow Today, Intelligent Information Interfaces. And during that conference, which was actually quite a diverse conference with groups of ethnographers, designers, artists, and engineers, I found a group of about 300 people who were very excited about the idea that everything in the world would be connected to everything at some point in time. And to me, this was quite strange, because if you have imagination, if you come from the arts or literature, then you know that everything is connected and you don't need additional technology for that. So you don't need to put a chip on everything in order to get some information or data from that chip. So at one point there was a lecture, and the person came on stage and he said, in 10 years time, if you walk in the woods, you will have a Bluetooth ring. If you want to know more about a tree, you can point your ring at the tree and a screen will pop up and it will tell you about the tree. And I was very upset with that, because I thought, wow, this is a group of people who are going to flood the entire planet with screens, telling or giving information about objects that we basically know, or that we can find out information about in other ways. We can, for example, ask somebody about it. And so I quickly realized that that this dream of connecting everything with everything was a bit older. So it basically started in the 50s in the factories, where the idea was to put sensors on machines and then do predictive maintenance to predict when they would become malfunctioning or out of order. In the 70s, it was called pervasive computing. And in the 80s and 90s, it was called ubiquitous computing, UbiComp. And there's a very, very good text by Mark Weiser, who wrote in 1991 a text called Computing and the Computer for the 21st Century. And in it, he describes this vision that you can interact with the world, with the analog world, but the analog world is actually enhanced by digital connectivity and digital functions. So, so that basically is still the dream of this vision. It was only, and then in the 2000, it was called ambient intelligence, and specifically by Philips, the Dutch company. It was only in 1999 that Kevin Ashton coined the term Internet of Things. And so that was around the moment that I started to look into it and to see that that it was still basically a very technical vision, and that the people driving it were specifically also engineers and computer scientists. And that this group was not, or is not, the entire world. So we need a much more diverse group of people to discuss if we want to go to this new hybrid world, which is this mix of analog and digital, or analog and virtual. So basically that's what I've been looking into and trying to grasp and understand for the past 20 years, how it is possible that this vision that was basically a kind of an engineering architecture of connected things has now spilled over into the entire world, and is trying to make the entire world smart. And this, of course, is fueled, as we know, by the latest developments in AI and the convergence and combination that we have now of Internet of Things, digital ledger technologies, and AI. So this is a very, very powerful combination. And this combination is changing our world in very, very, very specific and also very, very deep ways. And I always thought that that this should not happen in the background or in the back. That we should have conversations about it with as diverse group of people that we can find. Everyone should hopefully at some point find the time, and I know it's difficult, to reflect upon this and to think about if he or she would actually want to go into this new world where everything is connected. And if it is, who or what is controlling the data streams and also the data enhancing and the algorithms behind the algorithmic calculations that is AI. And I always thought that if this is the new hybrid reality, then we should also think about a hybrid democracy. So we should start to think about who is doing the decision-making in such a system, who is actually doing the decision-making in the end. That's the reason why I set up the IoT Day in 2010, because I wanted to create situations in which people could create their situations or meetings or have a cup of coffee or talk about their practice with people who are not engineers and who do not really understand this move towards this hybrid reality. And I think it has succeeded in the sense that over the past 13 years, we had, I think, about 400 or 500 events that people self-organized. Again, it doesn't have to be, or it shouldn't be, or a very formal, well thought through seminar. It's basically about creating possibilities to discuss this Internet of Things in the real world and what it is doing there. The way I always felt about it is double, of course. If the data and the enhancing of the data and the context of this data is controlled by a few companies or a few governments, this is not, I would say, what we can ask for as citizens. Some parties become so much wiser in such a small time frame that they basically create a position that others cannot go to or cannot follow. Yet I always also thought that there's a very interesting radical transparency in Internet of Things, because if we enhance objects, situations, and behavior of people, and then we create this kind of layer of data that say something about all these practices or all these objects or all these people, all this behavior of people. That is not objective, because the way we look at it and the way we design our systems always have cultural or technical affordances that are not neutral. So we cannot say, I think, that technology is neutral, it's only how you use it. I think technology is basically never neutral because it always contains very, very, very intuitive and implicit design decisions. So so still we have this layer of data that is trying to become information for people or for someone or for some system. That in itself, we can, I believe, think of as one of the most objective as possible layers to build decision-making systems on. I think if we look now what's happening in the world, we still see people trying to create decisions or make decisions with military power or raw power, sort of like something that we know from a lot of old ages. I think in this day and age, such behavior is quite outdated, and we all see that this is not the right idea to govern decision making. This notion of raw power. Then we've built notions of decision making on a particular kind of intelligence. We see this functioning in the European Union, which is basically run by a particular elite of intelligence and intelligent people that have basically all gone to the same universities, and there's not basically one worker or people that's doing a cleaning job in these gremia of decision making. It's basically a very, very homogeneous group with a particular kind of intelligence that's interesting in itself, but that's not the full real world. And we can see this also now, because in democracies in the West, we basically feel that a very large number of people doesn't feel represented anymore, and this quite sort of this upheaval and in any one of these systems, because the people in charge leading these systems for the past 150 years have kept fine-tuning their own intelligence and have become quite unhinged from what most people experience as reality. So then sort of this is, so if we cannot, if we feel that we cannot have this decision-making process run by raw power or military means, that is always in the end runs itself into the ground, that we see that this notion of intelligence that we've defined as intelligence has also become quite of an elite way of thinking that's also not reflecting what is happening on the ground. Then the other kinds of systems that we see are based on some form of religion, but we also see that we still have systems of decision-making that are based on religious beliefs. And this is also not really helpful, I would say, in the 21st century. So I've always seen sort of Internet of Things, if it's possible to create a democratic governance system on top of this layer of data that is coming from all these people and things and processes. I would say that's a very fair or one of the most fairest situations in decision making that we could have. So I've always been quite positive, because this notion of this full connectivity is very young. It's basically only just beginning. It's logical that certain companies and certain governments are claiming this or are doing governance on these layers, data lakes. It's logical that they try to create a monopoly and try to create full control. But I think I may be naive or over positive or over optimist. I think that there's something maybe even quite autonomous working in this Internet of Things mindset that can outgrow the current forms of trying to control all this data and all these inferences and all these connotations. So basically, I'm hoping for a more democratic governance of all this data, information, and knowledge. And if that should happen, we could have very different systems that we have now that are doing these decision-making systems. For example, I think it's still strange that in a day and age of people gathering huge amount of data streams on their telephones and an enormous amount of information, possess machines like their smartphones that are able to do computation basically itself or themselves, that they still accept that they live in a system which is called democracy, in which you vote every 4 years for a party. I mean, so we're all these individual people have enormous amounts of information at the tip of their fingerprints, sort of fingers all the time. Imagine an autonomous car that is getting one input every 4 years in order to make a decision, and it's not even the car. It's some kind of party that sort of has some ideas about the car. This makes no more sense at all. So to have such a system in which you go to do a vote every 4 years to a party that's representing people, and then you choose, they choose, not you choose, they choose people to put in some kind of parliament, which is about 100, 150, 200 people. And you have the same data sets on your telephone that they have. It makes no more sense. So, so I think we'll see a growing demand, especially I think of the younger generations, for better forms of decision making. And then what I think is the data coming from all these sensors, again, not objective in itself, but I think at this day and age, it's one of the best possible sources that we have to build decision making on. And so I'm quite, yeah, so to me, that's a definition of IoT for good. Of course, IoT for good is lots of products and applications and services. But I would say IoT for good, for good, let's say for the planet, to be a bit sort of, it means IoT for good decision making. Sort of that's how I would see it. And so I'm very happy that that through this idea of this IoT Day, we now have conversations in lots of places, and I think they're all giving people a bit more positive view on their own practice. Yes, we know we can build surveillance states. Yes, we know we can build full control, 1984, and all of that. But that will all be built and all be tried, and that will all go down because these systems never last long. So I find it much more interesting to think about the positive aspects that are in these Internet of Things and Internet of Things practices. Yeah, I hope I'm not wrong. So,
well, it's very interesting the way you come to the IoT for good, because when we talk about IoT, some of my partners and friends think everything is about technology, about the sensors, but you didn't talk anything about technology. You talk about society, about data. So how can we understand, most of all here, we are designers. So how come we can make to our students, to our partners, to our investigations, make this IoT for good? How do you think we can make this?
Yeah, I think, yeah, first of all, I would try to ask them in what kind of reality they live now, and in what kind of reality they would like to design. So a lot of the technical design goes on, let's build another app, and sort of people building an app after an app after an app. But now is a very interesting time, because we do not only get this notion of wearables and smart people, but we also have these notions of smart cities and all kinds of new applications and appliances. And so what is occurring is all these in-between spaces. At some point, people could also call it the metaverse, so there's a lot of it's this growing new world, which consists of an analog, a kinetic, kind of the normal world that we see, and then enhanced with sensors and sensor technology, and then a kind of a third world is emerging, this hybrid world. So that's going to be the challenge, to design for this hybrid world. And it's easy for me to say, because I don't know how to do it, but I think we should get people back again into also the real world, a little bit away from their screens, and to think that this design is so much tied to applications and services.
Okay. Claudio, tienes una pregunta.
Yes, I wrote it on the, well, hello, everybody. Hello, Rob. Nice to meet you. Talking about your decision, talking about decision making and using your layers image, the one you just showed us. What happens with the signs and meanings interpretation in order to make decisions? How does IoT and AI are pretended to deal with semiotic analysis? Because it's not only hard data. There's a lot of interpretation involved. Yeah. And I don't see how it will to fit in with semiotics analysis.
Yeah.
Semiotics, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think you're totally right. At the moment, this machine learning and that's going on is also looking into not only the hard data but also the context, and it's mixing this context with data, and you don't know how it got there. We don't know how it. We don't know the real meaning of the output. But this, I think, is also because we now see a kind of Wild West in which everything is emerging and is happening. But I think we should have a lot more governance on these systems, because they will basically determine the new basis for what we think is reality. So we should know what kind of algorithms are running, and we should know the nature of these algorithms, because we should know the bias that is in these algorithms. And but again, what I find very interesting in what you say is that we see the return of semiotics in this AI and this deep learning and machine learning that's happening. But it seems as if this semiotics is used quite instrumentally, and it's not really so, because the semiotics is a whole field in itself and has a tremendous complexity. But it seems as if some people are just taking some parts of it, feed that to the machine as it were. So yes, it's very complex. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember Marcela. You want to ask you something?
Hello.
Hi, Rob.
Hello.
Nice to see you again.
Yes.
I have a question. I want to know what you think about how can the IoT impact on the education process?
Yeah. On the education process itself. On the process of education.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to think about that.
I know. I think about you learning or intelligence university.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, I would not know that easy, because I thought about the education of IoT or education of and IoT for the process of education.
Yeah,
I think that's a great question. Yeah, but I don't have an answer quickly.
It's okay.
No,
I don't have
no.
the answer to.
No, I will think about it and write Edwin a kind of idea.
Thank you very much.
We're going to have to go to Belgium to make an investigation about it.
Yeah.
So Rob, I was wondering something personal about you. When you come to Mexico, you told me you don't use credit cards, just one. And it's just because you have to travel a lot. You don't like technology. You are, how to say, for example, I'm a geek. I like and love technology. And it seems like IoT must be like this, but you're not. So how come you become an IoT influencer and a person that talk about IoT?
Yeah. Well, I think so, because I still fear it, and I still don't really understand it, and but I feel I'm realistic. It's everywhere. It's going very fast. It's unstoppable. And so when you have something like this, which I think is a little bit like when we had the book in 1452, I think, with the Gutenberg press, it's such an important revolution or evolution, or such an important happening, that that we have to try to understand it, and we definitely have to develop a kind of governance for it. So if it's going to be so important that we have situations in which applications know yourself better than yourself, can make predictions about you that are but you cannot basically know yourself. If all these applications are basically owned or in the hands of companies and governments, I think we should make new systems and new systems of governance. And I always hope that especially the engineers, the people who are building these systems, realize that they also have to build their own governance sort of. So I think a week ago we had call to action to pause AI development or research for 6 months. And there were about 1,200 or 1,300 signatures under that letter. And in the letter, it said that if the AI field, consisting of the research institutes and the companies, small, medium-sized companies and all other actors, would not be able to reach an agreement on whether to pause AI for 6 months or not. And this is directly from the letter. Then they say, the letter says, if we cannot agree ourselves on these issues, we go to the government and ask the government to make a decision. But that's a bit easy. That's a bit too simple. If the people that understand that there's particular dangers are then calling on one actor, a government who has no clue about these issues, to intervene, then they miss the next inevitable and important step, which is to see that the group of 1,200 people that are signing this letter should start developing new governance models beyond democracy as we know it, beyond these decision-making systems that we have now that are tuned to states, because the notion of the state and the notion of this democracy as one's vote every 4 years is no longer tuned to reality. So they should think about new forms of governance and not just then fall back on one actor, which is the government, and ask them to intervene. So it's very strange. It's like a blind spot of a lot of experts in the field. They want to keep making new applications. They want to keep making new services. All these services and applications change the environment a particular way. The interplay and interaction of all these services and all these applications is changing the environment in a very fundamental way. But they don't want to think about what is actually needed to think about what type of governance is needed for all these changes in the real world. They still keep notions like the government in a static way, as if that's not going to happen, that's not going to change. So as long as there is this blind spot of people that do not see that their own actions change the nature of decision making fundamentally, we have to keep pushing on that sort of, and that's, I think, one of the most important things now, that maybe the engineers and computer scientists, maybe by particular characteristic, think that their actions have no consequences, or only consequences that they themselves think that are happening, and that they're missing all the unintended consequences. But I think that they need to take responsibility for their actions, and build new governance systems. Which again is easy for me to say, because I don't really know how they look. Although we had some old texts about that, but I cannot imagine that this group of people who signed this letter there must be so much expertise in that group that that they find new ways out.
Talking about this, Claudio has a question, and before this, I want you to talk something about the future. When I started to study IoT, all my partner says IoT will be disappear. It's just an item of time. At this point, I think we are surrounded by the IoT, and there's a lot of future and a lot of things like intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, context awareness, etc. How do you see the future? Future 20 years ago?
Yes, I think so. In the 70s, we had the term pervasive computing, and that was sponsored by IBM. And then in the 90s, we had ubiquitous computing and Ubicomp, and that was sponsored by Xerox PARC. And in 2000, we had ambient intelligence, and that was sponsored by Philips. And none of these terms grew because companies realized if I use ambient intelligence, I'm in the Philips ecosystem. So when in 1999, Kevin Ashton came with this notion of Internet of Things, he was a product manager at Procter & Gamble. So he was working with RFID. So he was working with things, and he saw that they were adding chips or QR codes or to things. It was for him very logical to think about Internet of Things. So the term is still here because it's not tied to a particular business ecosystem. It is quite neutral, and because it's neutral, anyone can use it. For example, Cisco tried to push the Internet of Everything for a while, but that was only Cisco doing it. So people realized if I pushed or if I use the Internet of Everything, then I'm basically pushing a kind of Cisco vision or term. And so the term did not really catch on or replace the Internet of Things. And indeed, I also thought every year, I think the Internet of Things, it's going to disappear, or but it's not, because we need a term for this all-encompassing shift that we see. So we have AI, machine learning, deep learning, all of these things, but Internet of Things is still a little bit above everything. So so
Okay.
I think we'll keep it for some time.
I think so. Claudio.
Thank you, Edwin. Well, right now, inside this Wild West, we can admire chaos, and eventually it will come to a kind of order. So what kind of order would be ideal, in this case, maybe for design or maybe for the public? How to access, who can access deepness? I think you wanted to give us your statement before. And besides all this is the energy, the amount of energy needed for this to work, to really exist. I mean, that's something that not everybody talks about. So should there be a kind of a hybrid process, human internet with rules, policies, or maybe total freedom, translation between systems, this thing you were telling about Cisco, but there's not only Cisco. There are other platforms, and maybe we can talk about if it's Mac or it's Microsoft or it's Unix. I don't know. How do you see the mix?
Yeah.
And how could it settle down in an ideal way?
Yeah. Well, to me, in an ideal way, it settles down into basically what is now called a federated way, which is it settles down in local, decentralized forms of information and knowledge, but still really with a community type of action. This is also where models are trained in this. It's very, very local. So, and then in this federation, it's possible to fuse this local learning with other local learning systems. And ideally, I would say, it all boils down to having a very own hardware device, which is something that we gave away. We gave the smartphone away, which is basically where everybody is on 90, 100 times. So I would say, for example, if you look at Mexico, I would give all Mexicans a new own device, which is a smartphone, a thing that basically runs a lot of computation locally, and all the data that it doesn't store on the device, it stores in public servers or sort of this way. So we can fuse out Facebook and Twitter and all these apps that everybody sort of is sort of working on. I mean, I'm telling you my ideal vision, right? Sort of that's the ideal vision. Yeah,
that's perfect. I mean, that's what I wanted to hear. Yes. I don't know the others, but it's very interesting. All this.
Yes, and then on this device, which basically runs its own algorithm, we use it in such a way with every service that we buy, every product that we buy, everything that we buy, we add, let's say, 30% or 35 or 40%, or 25, and that's the only taxes that we will still have. There's no need for government taxes anymore, because there's no more need for government. We don't need these silos of decision making where all this voting is going on. Why would we outsource our decision making to sort of like all of these people? We can run it in our machines locally. And then I would say that that in this taxes that we pay on every service or every product, and sort of that's 25% goes to machines, 25% goes to animals, 25% goes to humans, and 25% goes to the planet. So that's my ideal kind of version. So we have to take control of the most invasive and most important device that's around now, which is the smartphone. It's really incredible that we all use it, and that 90 or 95% of all value goes to a few companies. That's insane. So we need to take back control on that level, and make that device foldable with graphene. We can run our own Instagram type of and WhatsApp type of things. But it's so this is what sort of, because there was no because me and a few other people, we basically saw in the flash what could happen 20 years ago with this type of machines, and we tried to of course we went to governments or the commission and we said, well, if you don't own the hardware, you want to own territory, but owning territory, especially, well, not now in Ukraine, with sort of like, becomes quite meaningless if you don't own the hybrid territory, if you don't own the data territory that's on top. And if you still think that you can rule because you collect taxes, then why should people continue paying taxes if you don't own the most important source of value, which is this data value? We might as well pay taxes to these companies, but they don't actually do things for us. But these states are also getting extremely problematic in their spending, and so they claim to basically have some governance or rule over some things, but they have no more real impact anymore, and people will start to feel that, and they will start to say, and then we'll get a lot of populism, because then the states are failing, and people will say, why are the states are failing, and sort of all of that. And so that's why I think that, so my ideal situation would be, well, ideally it would be like a new United Nations kind of level, with sort of with decentralized local groups that basically, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 more questions, and we're going to close because Rob is at the afternoon, and I think he wants to rest a little. So Mónica,
Okay.
Mónica, tienes tus preguntas? You have your questions? Do you remember Mónica? She was at the workshop in Mexico. Adelante, Mónica.
Okay. Hello, Rob.
Hello.
We have 2 questions for you. The first, how to become a smart city? Is it a government or society decision?
Well, it is both, because you need both. But what we have seen in the literature, but also in the actual practice in smart cities in the past 20 years, is that if it's not carried by citizens, it's not happening. So citizens need to see the value coming from the sensors, and again the data from the sensors. And if they don't see the value, it's very difficult. So you need both.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is, IoT is important in the society, but is very expensive. How to deal with this situation?
I think there's 2 answers to this. I think the first is that a lot of IoT, which is low power and long range, sort of like what this is like, the LoRa technologies, is actually not that expensive. So this there's a Things network in the Things network. I think there's also will be a Things network in Mexico. So that's this first basic layer of technology, which is this LoRa network layer. That is not that expensive. That's also very good layer to start with the smart cities.
Yes, I'm not agree with, well, I am agree with Rob. There's no expensive. I know with the 5G is very fast and cheaper than used to be the connection and the data. Well, we want to thank you, Rob, for this. I think you're very kind to hear about us, to talk to you to talk to us, and let us know everything about IoT. And we want to invite you to Mexico again.
Love to come.
Make some workshop or something, and get new travel to another pyramids. And I don't know, si alguno de ustedes tiene alguna pregunta, someone has to add something or a conclusion about this. No? Well, so thank you again, Rob. Hope you will contact again very soon.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for having me, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope everyone did. And again, I think if people want I just think that things are going also in a good way. Lots of things are going in a good way. So this technology is also quite liberatory, and there's a very strong radical transparency hidden in it. So I think it's really important work that you do, Edwin, and so keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Y un aplauso, ¿no? Como proponía Claudio. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Rob. Nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you too. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.